So I'm going to show you how to build a scale and what the formula for a scale is. Every scale is made up of a combination of whole steps and half steps. A half step is the nearest distance you can go on the piano. So you could hit every key as you go up. Now, it's usually between a black and a white key, but there are those spots where there's no black key in between. So this would actually be the nearest distance, would be from a white key to another white key. Whole step, of course, is just 2 half steps. So that's a whole step. Half step, also a half step, whole step, whole step. This could be a whole step too, because that would be 2 half steps. The first step, we're going to put a note on every line and space going up until we have 8 notes. We're going to start on the letter that our scale is named after. We're doing C major scale. So we're going to start with C, and we're going to put a note on every line and space going up until we have 8 notes and one kind of every letter. By the time we get to the back to the top again, we should have landed on C again. We laid out our 8 notes that we need for our scale, starting on middle C and hitting every line and space until we have 8. Now we're going to go ahead and label those. In order to lay out our formula, we're going to need to measure the distance between each 2 notes going up the scale. So we're going to just put these brackets here so that it's really clear which ones we're talking about. Next, we're going to go look at our scale and figure out what our whole step, half step formula is. Half step is the nearest distance between notes. Whole steps are just 2 half steps combined. So the first 2 notes we need to look between are C and D. So we come down here and we can see that this is a whole step. If it had went to here, that would have been a half step. So we're going to put a W under that to show that was a whole step. Now we need to look between D and E. So let's look between D and E. Is that a whole step or half step? Well, it has this black key in between, so it's definitely a whole step. Next, we need to look between E and F. There's no black key in between, so that means this is a half step. The nearest distance you can go from here is here. So now we need to put an H up there for half step. Now let's look between F and G. And you can see we have another black key, so that's another whole step. Next, we need to look between G and A. And we've got a black key in between, so it's definitely a whole step. Now we need to look between A and B. And we have another black key, so that's a whole step. The last one that we have is between B and C. And you can see there's no black key in between, so that is a half step. So our formula for a major scale is whole step, half, whole, 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 half. When we take another scale to figure out, we're going to need to build it the same way. Put a note, 8 notes on every line and space, lay out our letters, and then we're going to need to make it fit this formula using sharps or flats. So you might notice when you look down at C scale, you can see that the 2 half steps that happen in our formula happen between the 3rd and the 4th note of the scale and the 7th and the 1. You could call that 8 if you want, but it's just 1 again. So now we're going to take another scale and build it using our formula. So we're going to go ahead and use D. We usually learn our scales in the circle of fifths, and I'm going to go over that in another video. But let's just take the next letter one for now and see if we can build it using our whole step, half step formula. The first step in building the scale is going to be starting with our D, which we know is right here. And then I'm going to put a note on every line and space until I have 8 notes again. I like to build scales in this order, doing 1 on each step and building through your alphabet, because music notation is really visual. It should look the same on the staff as it does on the piano. And if we don't build it right, it's going to look different than it looks. So we need to make sure that it looks like it's stepping just like it's stepping here, and that we're hitting one kind of every letter going up through our alphabet. If you do that, you won't make mistakes and call something a flat when it should have been a sharp, because there are notes, of course. When we raise a note, if we take F here, this could be F sharp, or it could be G flat, sharp raises, flat lowers. How we determine whether we call this F sharp or G flat totally depends on the key that it's in. And that's all about making the music look the same so we can see relationships. And when we move something from one area to another and we want it to sound the same, it's still going to look like it has the same relationships. A crucial part of getting good at reading is recognizing patterns. So it's important to be consistent with some of these music notation things so that you will recognize the pattern. Otherwise, if it looks completely different, you won't recognize that it's the same thing. Now that we have our letters laid out, and we have one kind of every letter, we're going to go through and check our formula and make sure that each interval ends up with the whole step or half step that it needs in order to build D major scale. So we're going to have to use either sharps or flats to raise or lower. Let's go check each interval. So the first one we're going to need to check is between D and E. So let's take a look here. And we need it to be a whole step. Is that already a whole step? Yes, it is, because it has this black key in between. So 2 halves make a whole. Next, we need to check between E and F. That needs to be a whole step as well. Let's take a look. Is that a whole step? No, it is not. There's no black key in between, so this is the nearest distance you can go from here to here. So now we're going to need to raise this in order to make it a whole step. So we're going to use a sharp raises and flat lowers. So if you do it this way, you won't make mistakes, because this couldn't be called G flat because we need one kind of every letter. When we put sharps or flats on, it has to go before the note and after the letter. Just think of it as this is letting you know that it's coming up. This one here is just describing what kind of F you have. All right, so let's check the next interval. So now we need to check between F sharp and G. So let's go take a look. Here's our F sharp that we already found, and G, and we need a half step. Do we already have that? Yes, we do. It's the nearest distance you can go, so that is a half step. Next interval we need to check is between G and A, and that needs to be whole step. So let's take a look. G and A, yes, that is a whole step. Next one we need to check is between A and B. We need another whole step. So between A and B, that is a whole step. Now we need to check between B and C, and we also need a whole step here. So let's go take a look. This is not a whole step. So we're going to need to add a sharp in order to make that a whole step. So now we've got 2 half steps. So let's go ahead and make that C sharp. The last interval we need to check is between C sharp and D. So let's go take a look. Here was our C sharp we left off and D. And we needed a half step. That is already half step. So now we have it. We have our D major scale, which has 2 sharps, F sharp and C sharp.